The British Hammer Dracula series from 1958 to 1974 consists of 9 movies. For parts 1 to 4, see the same named rare view. 1970 Peter Sesties' directorial debut, Taste the Blood of Dracula, begins with a businessman who, for whatever reason, is thrown out of the carriage and sees in the forest, no idea why, Dracula's death scene from the previous movie as a kind of vision. Finds his clothes, including his blood, which he sells to 3 distinguished English gentlemen, which use them to accidentally resurrect the Count in an old chapel, unknowingly killing his disciple in the process. He now seeks revenge by letting the unsuspecting trio die at the hands of their own children. However, one of them knows about vampirism and initiates young Paul before he dies, who now tries to free his bride from the Count by rededicating the old chapel, which in Dracula's eyes suddenly shines in its original splendor, and he crumbles to ashes, redeemed by the hand of God. Dracula was not supposed to be here, and you can tell. He seems like a spectator in his own movie. All the action comes from others, because the story makes no sense whatsoever. Why the hell should Dracula of all people give a shit about anyone, especially about his followers he never gave a fuck? Actually, the slain student was supposed to rise again as a vampire to take revenge, but Warner Brothers refused to release the movie without Dracula's appearance, which prompted Hammer to persuade Christopher Lee to return and somehow fudge him into the story. Which rather unimaginative, meaner replacement, Alice's girlfriend, is again called Lucy, is also again the first female victim, with hardly any Dracula, especially in the second half, is strikingly similar to its predecessor. As there, the unloved boyfriend of a daughter, Paul, he has even the same name as the last movie, is instructed shortly before the end here with a letter to become Dracula's final opponent. And the character suddenly changes sides here too. And Dracula is basically killed by God, even more so than in the last one. The movie got mixed feedback, like not horrible but not really good either. Nothing could be found out about costs and box office. From here on, the Halloween rule applies again, not as good as the last one, but at least not quite as terrible as the next. In the same year, Roy Ward Baker's Scars of Dracula crawled out of its grave. Here, Dracula's remains from the last movie are revived thanks to a giant bat. And shortly after, the residents of a nearby village find his first victim. While the man set off to burn down his castle, all the women get killed by giant bats. But actually only one bat, which they sell us here as several ones. Several years later, I'm sure it was only one, young Paul spends the night in Dracula's castle ruin and is murdered. While searching for him, his brother Simon and fiancée Sarah come across the Count, only escaping with the help of the servant. The local priest explains to Simon shortly before he is killed by the bat how a vampire can be destroyed, and he returns to the castle to confront Dracula, who has Sarah in his power. When he attacks Simon with an iron spear, lightning strikes the spear and the Count falls burning into the deep. In Dracula Nights of Horror, the German title, he unusually uses weapons such as a dagger or a spear, which even annoyed God himself, who straight away sent a bolt of lightning. But otherwise he practically only consists of set pieces from his predecessors. Here too, his main opponent, as in the last 2 movies, is only towards the end by someone with experience, here a priest, once again shortly before his death, brought into position. And Dracula dies again, as in part 4 and 5, through heavenly intervention. There is also a servant like in part 3, he even has the same name. The giant bats were a rejected idea from part 2. And a basic story like in part 1 or the original. Paul ignores the warnings like Harker once did, arrives in a black carriage. Dracula presents himself as a charming host at the beginning. Paul first gets to deal with one of his brides and has a picture of the current Mia replacement Sarah with him. The movie was also supposed to serve as a reboot in case Christopher Lee didn't want to return. Therefore no explanation why his ashes are in the castle and no longer in the chapel like at the end of the last part. He is also, at least in one scene, a little more revealing and harder. It's considered the most brutal of the series. It was also the first of several Hammer movies to receive an R rating. Received mostly negative reviews, even back then from Christopher Lee, and is considered a flop. And the reason why the next ones were no longer set in the 19th century, but in the 1970s. In Alan Gibson's Dracula AD 1972, the Count and Van Helsing die after a fierce battle on the streets of London in 1872. 100 years later, the Count is brought back in a black mass performed by Johnny Alucard, Dracula in reverse, and now wreaks havoc in 1972 London. His victims are young women who reverse Dracula has to procure for him. Scotland Yard asks Van Helsing's great-grandson, who of course looks exactly like his ancestor, for help. He recognizes the connection and fears that granddaughter Jessica, now under Dracula's spell, is in danger. Confronts Dracula with holy water, who falls into a prepared pit and fades to ashes. Dracula hunts mini-girls, the stupid German title. The mini refers to mini-skirts, has no connection to its predecessors, although Peter Cushing plays Van Helsing again, as their chronology begins later in 1885, and practically shoulders the entire movie, since Dracula, as usual, barely makes an appearance. The lunatic time capsule with a horrible, of course, groovy 70s beat, rightly received mostly negative feedback. Nothing can be found out about costs and box office, but now, like other garbage, enjoys a certain trash cult status. According to an unconfirmed source, its poor box office performance prompted Warner Brothers to turn down an offer from Hammer to co-finance the next one the following year, also in modern setting, which perhaps for this reason was not released in the US until 1978.
Hey
1973 sees the release of The Satanic Rites of Dracula, again by Alan Gibson, as a kind of sequel set in the distant future of 1974. The most important representatives of England from politics, science, the military and industry meet to celebrate satanic rites, so just like nowadays, but under the eyes of a Secret Service spy. Presumably the science fiction element here. In reality, they are the organizers and prevent the elites from being persecuted for their ungodly crimes. The Secret Service assigns an inspector from Scotland Yard to the case, who again turns to Van Helsing. He identifies the mysterious industrial leader as the resurrected Count Dracula, who wants to destroy humanity, which means his food source, with a genetically engineered plague bacillus, because he supposedly wants to die, and make Van Helsing's granddaughter Jessica his consort. In the afterlife or what? After a scuffle between the inspector and one of his followers, the main computer explodes, setting Dracula's mansion on fire along with the plague bacteria. Dracula gets caught in a thorn bush, where he is then staked and destroyed by Van Helsing. In the completely bonkers mix of horror, science fiction and espionage thriller, which doesn't even bother to show a Dracula resurrection scene, he's just back, Dracula, James Bond villain style, is the head of a big company that involves a group of high-ranking people in a plan to decimate humanity with a new kind of highly viral plague? Since 2020 and Count Gates and undead pelts, proven population decimating, gene manipulated poison injections, falsely declared as vaccinations, no science fiction anymore. Count Dracula, CEO, got rightly driven a stake through the heart by critics. It's considered the worst of the series, was a flop and marks Christopher Lee's last Dracula appearance. It also seems to have been the first movie to use a silver bullet against a vampire. I thought it was so bad that it was almost good again. And definitely a hell more entertaining than the last Cucumber. Also starts much more revealing. Finally some tits. I mean, of course, what a lousy manipulative trick. And has a real soundtrack. Not the horrible hippie noise like in Dracula meets backwards Dracula.
I've got nothing to say, I didn't say before. I bet I can. Why the blood run cold in the hired hand on ours, the hand of God, flood land and river upon a run cold, turn cold.
In 1974, The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires by Roy Ward Baker, who also botched Part 6, tried again unsuccessfully to give the Dracula series a new direction. In collaboration with the Shaw Brothers studio, which provided half of the financing, the plot was relocated to the Far East, incorporating kung fu fight scenes. Here in 1804, Dracula, who for whatever reason bound to his mausoleum, wearing embarrassing makeup, seizes the body of a high priest of the Order of the Seven Golden Vampires, travels to China and begins a new reign of terror. But actually, just like in The Seven Samurai, whose concept served as an inspiration here as so often, only one village is affected. 100 years later, Van Helsing, after a failed vampire lecture in China where he was not taken seriously, meets the descendant of the only person who was able to kill one of these vampires. And he and his son agreed to help 7 kung fu fighters / siblings reclaim their mountain village, which is now the domain of the 7 powerful vampires, which repeatedly attack the village as half-rotten creatures with golden masks and amulets in order to kidnap its most beautiful virgins for involuntary blood donations. In the end, the siblings and Van Helsing manage to defeat the vampires and their zombie army and finally destroy Dracula with a silver spear. The first kung fu horror thriller, according to the advertising, was also the last appearance of Peter Cushing as Van Helsing, as usual the only bright spot. The completely crazy, confusing schlock actually works neither as a vampire horror nor as martial arts action. The so-called vampires don't actually bite anyone in battle, but use swords like ordinary people. The Magnificent 7 kung fu siblings understandably received mostly negative reviews and was not a financial success. In my opinion, however, still entertains due to its curiosity and high trash level. Back then, the Shaw Brothers were dissatisfied with director Roy Ward Baker's work and had the martial arts sequences choreographed by action veteran and co-director Chan Chi. See also the Wuxia special in the Chinese Ghost Story retrospective, which also added scenes to the 90-minute runtime. The Eastern version is 20 minutes longer. The story also appeared in 1977 as comic in the House of Hammer number 4, and the movie was re-released in 1979 after Hammer's bankruptcy in a heavily edited 75-minute version as The Seven Brothers Meet Dracula.